Hello, everybody. Welcome to Renegade Radio. Hey, so just got done recording with Dave, and man, it's just so good. It's just going to be different, but this is exactly what I pictured Renegade Radio to be like. Okay, let me go through a couple things that you're probably going to need to pay attention to. So, one, if you're going to listen to this with kids, just know there is some adult language that is going to be used, starting roughly about halfway through the episode. Dave and I just have a very unique relationship, but what I'm hoping is that this is going to sound odd, but I'm kind of hoping that some of you will be offended, and but I want you to sit with that offense and ask yourself why. The other thing is, this is kind of funny, is somewhere in the middle there were maybe the 30th minute, maybe 40th minute, Skaya comes in, and you may be able to hear her panting. Thankfully, there was no dog around, so she wasn't barking. She just kind of laid down, which I was really surprised by. Number three, I'm sorry, is that you're going to find something really funny. You're going to kind of see me jerk out of the chair a little bit, kind of like the 48th minute, maybe 50th minute. I was having a Charlie horse randomly in my hamstring, and so I was doing doing what I can to get myself out of that as well. You guys are going to really love this episode. Please leave a comment in below. Let me know what you guys like, dislike. Let me know if you were actually offended by it, because I actually want you to be offended by it. So if you're going to wonder, like, Steve, are you not offended by it? I am not at all. If anything, I embrace it. That's why this is Renegade Radio. Speaking of which, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. This is the one podcast that is meant for rebels, for renegades, misfits, square pegs and round holes, and for all of us who just do not like the status quo. This is Renegade Radio, Season 2, Episode 008 with David Hull. Hello, Renegade Nation. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Renegade Radio. So happy that you are able to join us. This is going to be, I really do have a feeling that this one is going to lead into maybe three parts, just not all today. Ladies and gentlemen, I have not only a really good friend, but I have, at times, he's been a mentor of mine, and he, if anything, is definitely been family. He's been a brother to me. I have David Hull with us today, and he has probably one of the most fascinating life journeys up to this date thus far, which I'm just going to go ahead and wildly assume that there is just more to come in his life with him and his wife, Mindy, which we're hoping that later on there'll be something where we can collab together, and you guys are going to get a whole bunch of value out of that episode if we can if we can make that happen. But anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, because the what he has experienced has been, most of us will never come remotely close to some of the things that he has gone through or experienced.
Yes.
But also, one of the things that I've definitely appreciated about Dave and our friendship over the years is that he has taught me how to reframe certain aspects of life. And so there are going to be elements of today's talk which I'm hoping you'll be challenged with. Like I mentioned in the previous solo episode, that we should be challenged by some of these thoughts of our guests. So, having said that, Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, man. It's a pleasure. The 25 years of conversations building into a singular moment. So I'm glad to be here.
Has it really been 25 years?
Yeah, it's getting close to that, man. I
Wow.
think I had hair when I met you, so um,
Yes.
I've definitely had to reframe that.
There's a different level of reframing, which we neither of us had ever really expected to come, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Everything migrates south the older that you get.
No. So for you young guns, pay attention.
Yeah.
Dave, why don't you just go ahead and start us off, man? Tell us your origin story. Start there. Let's start from the beginning, and then I'll just let you just kind of go, man, and you can just go off in whatever direction that you sense that you need to go in.
Okay. Um, Man, origin story. I feel like I should be wearing my superhero outfit.
You can go
Every
grab your mask.
overdose for my wife. Just a little candid weekend stuff. How far back to go?
I don't know. I
So
guess maybe go from I don't know, just start from like high schoolish because that's probably where I would assume because that's kind of where I've have known some of your stories.
origin story. So I grew up in a relatively chaotic house, one that in which violence was a present reality, but also um, it was broken in the sense that my dad was chronically unfaithful to my mom, and it created a lot of instability. The way that my sister and I handled that was very different. I was the golden child, the rule follower, scholar athlete, tried to do everything right, and she was very much the renegade and the rebel, rule breaker. And that kind of flipped when we went to college. And I didn't grow up in a religious household. I think probably the God in our home was intellect. And you know what? I'd seen church people, but they were pretty embarrassing to me. I knew enough about scripture to know that the way that most of them lived didn't really reflect what they said they believed. And so I'm not a big fan of people who live hypocritical lives, and that was true long before I came to faith myself. And so, like we did the whole like go to Christmas services, maybe an Easter service, and this big production. Everyone's all wearing their pastels with their plastic smiles and the I'm fine, you're fine. And then there just didn't seem to be really genuine connection in those communities. And so I just moved on. It's pretty easy to span over a decade. When I went to college, I decided I was really tired of being a rule follower, and 'cause I hadn't really experienced life. My life had been defined by scholastics, right? Like I think I tested out of the first 3.5 years of college. I went in as a second semester junior. I had done competitive track and field, cross country, basketball, but I hadn't done really anything else. Never had a girlfriend, never gone to a party, I never drank, never did drugs, nothing. And so I was like, well, now's the right time for me to try everything once. I'll let myself try everything once. And I probably should have paid attention to the fact that there's a history of addiction in my family tree on both sides. But suffice it to say, for the better part of the next decade, trying things once turned into really not having an off button. And my goal for the next decade was hedonism. It was like, how far can I pursue pleasure? I pursued money, I pursued women, I pursued drugs, alcohol, like really like how far can I take it? Like, can I be the last man standing? And in hindsight, I really feel like God protected me a lot. I lived with 6 guys at the University of Texas in Austin who were all drug dealers in various capacities, and I'm the only one who's still alive. 3 of them were murdered. One of them died of a drug overdose, and another one ended up in prison and died in prison. And so I got to see really the dark underside of addiction, like the violence and drug trafficking and really the exploitation of weakness in people. I got to see the money side of things. People that I knew were making millions of dollars, moving insane amounts of cocaine, hallucinogenics. They were moving pounds and pounds and pounds of weed. And, there was definitely an allure. And like, really, it seemed like freedom because that community really flaunts rules. Like, we can do what we want when we want. And there was an intoxication of power and the semblance of power. So when I also began to experience the negative side effects of that lifestyle. I've overdosed in that decade. I overdosed 3 or 4 times on different drugs. When I was 20, I was facing a triple felony because I was spun out on cocaine and I wiped out one of my best friend's bank accounts. And thankfully she chose to not press charges and, did the rehab route instead. And I would like to say that I matured a little bit. Like I became a functional addict. Like I worked full time, put myself through college, but I was very much addicted. And, then probably back in 2005, just by happenstance, a friend asked if I would like to go to this church singles group. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, the girls are kind of cute. That's a good reason to go. And when I walked in, I did a double take because the guy who was leading at that time, I was like, man, last time I saw you, we were doing meth and ecstasy together. I'm like, what are you doing here? And he kind of talked about this experience that he had had with God that radically changed his life. But for me, for the first time, I think I was like, maybe there's something to this because I know this guy and he was an asshole. Like, like a very charismatic one, but like, in the drug world, I didn't trust him. And like who he was really radically different.
Hmm.
And I was just telling my wife this story. So like we went to this young adult conference up in Kansas City that year. And it was called One Thing. And we were listening, worshiping it. I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. Like all these people are right around our age. They're in their 20s and um, really into this God thing. And then, like, for the first time in my life, I heard this impression. It sounded like a voice. It wasn't audible externally, but it was internal. And it was like, I want for you to go outside and I want for you to pray for somebody. And I was like, I didn't really have a frame of reference for that, but I was like, I did say that I would try everything once. And so, like, why not try this thing? I mean, that's kind of cool. Like, I'm very, like, woo woo mystical, So I walked outside the conference center and it was in the, downtown Kansas City Square. And I'm looking around, and I'm really hoping that the person that I have to pray for is like a really beautiful woman who's going to be impressed by my spiritual like acumen. But like my eyes settle on this guy. He's like 6'4", like tatted out, like goth hair, piercings, and like very clearly is like he's the one.
Naturally.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, no, and so like I sat down on this little sidewalk, the wall there, and I'm just like arguing, I guess, with God, and I'm like, really, like you could pick anyone else that's out here, but like that guy, like, mm, and I'm as I'm sitting there, all of a sudden, this huge hand just lands on my shoulder, and I turn, and it's this guy, and he's like, I really feel like you're supposed to pray for me.
Hmm.
And, I was like, "Well, okay." So we sat at a picnic table, and it turns out that he was feeling called to go open an orphanage down in Mexico. And, as I prayed for him, all of a sudden things started kind of tumbling into my mind that I just spoke to him. And uh, they were very specific about who he was and what he was called to do. And like he was super encouraged and thanked me, and I walked away. And so, Uh, I like to, when I reflect back, uh, I like to think of that as my first exposure to to a God who wants to interact with us in an intimately personal way, not just like a feel good theory or idea like that brings me comfort, but like a God that wants to speak. And I'm like this guy that was from California and this random dude from Texas who wasn't even really sure why he was there, who wasn't even really sure if he believed in God. Like God kind of orchestrated us crossing paths in a way that spoke life to this guy from California in a way that was very intimate and meant something to him. And so I had a couple of encounters like that. I was working as a personal trainer and rehab therapist. I was making great money, had a beautiful girlfriend who was Christian, like air quotes, Christian, like I suppose she was. And then I really felt like God said, like, you don't really know my son Jesus. I want for you to go to school to get to know him. And I was like, why would I leave a 6-figure job to do that? That doesn't make sense. And so I asked my friends, and it was very intentional. I was very intentional about asking my friends who didn't believe in God if they thought that was a good idea because I was trying to stack the deck. I was like trying to get some like community feedback that was insane. And unfortunately, all of them's like, "Oh no, we could totally see you doing that." And not only that, like my girlfriend was like, "Not only could I see you doing that, like I want to pay for your first semester."
Wait, did she really? Oh, wow, I did not know that part. Wow.
You know,
So, hold
so
on, before you go on real quick, Dave, so I just wanna give a little bit of background to the audience because I know I'm gonna be interjecting with a lot of stuff like I just did there. So, for those who are listening, Dave and I go way back, and so right about this time that he's talking about, like, Dave and I have probably just met
mhm.
for the most part, right? Like, we're maybe, like, 6 months to a year of maybe knowing each other from this Bible study, and so a lot of these things that I will interject because there are gonna be some elements that I know that I don't know part of the story. Dave, before you continue on, there's just one because I'm curious about this because I don't think I've ever asked you about this before, is that just before you started coming to True Life to that Bible study and somebody had invited you to it, what like, where was your mindset? Where was your heart? Like, what were you thinking that because like you said before, obviously church people, the whole church thing, not your deal. Very very possible, high potential that, the girls are cute at church, which they are most of the time. Then, but something must have triggered. So do you think like the Holy Spirit was already leading you? Were you just in a place of curiosity, brokenness? Like where were you at then?
Yeah, so like I believe like so in scripture it says that God pours out his spirit on all flesh. And so like I believe that the Holy Spirit is at work in the lives of everyone, trying to draw them to God. You know, so like I would say yes, the Holy Spirit was at work. But for me, by that point it had been about 7 years of hard addiction. I had lost a lot of close friends, I had come close to losing my own life through various overdoses. And I recognized that I was in bondage. You know, at that point, like I was struggling with a pain pill addiction. I was eating the equivalent of anywhere from 50 to 100 hydrocodone a day. And so for 3 years, I was throwing up blood every single day, but I couldn't stop. And like I couldn't function if I wasn't eating pain pills, you know? And so, like, one of the things that I had heard about this Jesus guy is that he could set you free from bondage. And so periodically, I kept coming around the church to see if I could encounter someone who was like him. You know, like, okay, so this guy can set you free. Like, I was assuming that maybe the people in church would be more like him, but unfortunately, that wasn't my experience. You know, like there was no power, and I needed power. I needed power to break the chains that were in my life. Like I didn't need platitudes or bumper sticker Christianity. Like I needed people who were walking in the power of the Spirit, and and so I kept kind of circling back. And so that experience I shared was like, "Oh, okay, so there is power here. I just hadn't seen it displayed yet." So fast forward, so I decided to go cold turkey on everything when I went to seminary. Like God, like broke the desire for everything, just like that. But I was like a fish out of water. I didn't grow up in the church. I hadn't gone to Bible college, and now I'm, in graduate level seminary classes. I'm like this is like getting thrown in the deep end. That November, I came back for Thanksgiving, and we discovered that my dad had another affair, a long-term affair, um, and something inside of me snapped, and I was literally going to beat my dad to death. I was going to put his head through the wall until he stopped breathing. It was 20 years of him inflicting pain on our family through his selfish choices, and I was done. And at the same time, I loved my dad, and so the only thing that I knew could mute that kind of rage was painkillers. So I reconnected with an old dealer. He didn't have my hydrocodone, but he had 20 milligram oxycodone. And so over the course of the next 3 or 4 days, I think I ate 30 of them. And I remember flying back from Houston back up to Kentucky. And while I was on the plane, like I started having mini seizures. What I didn't know was my liver was starting to fail and my lungs were filling with fluid. And our plane got rerouted because of inclement weather, so we never made it there. We got rerouted to the Tri-City area in Tennessee, I believe. And I didn't think about it, but like I had a friend who was supposed to pick me up at the airport, and I never called her to let her know I wasn't coming. No, I told her I wasn't coming till the next day, but I didn't tell her where I was at because it didn't occur to me.
Hmm.
So the next day, I didn't show up on my flight, and this friend freaked out a little bit. So she prayed and asked, and God told her the hotel that I was at. And she called the front desk, and they said that I hadn't checked out. And they came to my room, and they found my body, comatose body, on the floor. So I got life flighted to the hospital, and the doctors called my family and said, like, you need to prepare for the worst. Like, he's probably not going to make it. I came to on the hospital table. They were intubating me to clear the fluid out of my lungs. I didn't know where I was. The last thing I remember was being in the hotel room. And so I freaked out. I punched a nurse in the face. I grabbed the tube and started pulling it out of my throat. And like as I did so, the fluid from my lungs started bubbling out and getting in my nose. And they
Ugh.
kind of wrestled me down into restraints, and I was so panicked that I snapped the restraints off of the table, and I started getting up. And I can still remember seeing the neon light overhead, and like it begins to fade to black, and I can feel myself falling to the table. And as I was falling, God spoke to me really clearly, and He said, like your whole life you lived in your own strength. I wanted for you to use the last ounce of your own strength to try to save your life, and I wanted for you to fail. And He said, like, only my grace is sufficient.
Mm.
And then everything faded to black. And I was on life support, had a ventilator pumping my lungs for me for 4 or 5 days. I had a group of students come. They fasted and prayed and skipped a week of class. They just sat by my bedside.
Wow.
And 5 days later, I walked out of the hospital without a scratch. And as I was walking out of the hospital, like God said, you're walking out of this hospital on the wings of 1,000 prayers. Like I've called for you to be a man of prayer so that the world might know that I hear and I answer prayer. And really, I think that started my journey. Everything before that was a preface because the honest truth was I encountered God in this intimately personal way, not because I was holy and not because I was seeking God diligently. One of my most shameful and lowest moments, right? Like I was homicidal, wanted to kill my own father, overdosed on drugs so that I didn't do that. And He showed mercy. And I didn't really know who He was. Like cool. Like I knew like God, but like so I spent the next 6 years, I said, look, man, obviously like I don't know how to live my life. My own wisdom literally led me to the point of death. And I surely don't know how to be a Christian. So if you tell me what to do and where to go, I'll do it. And so I mean, this is the point where like the stories are dense, right? Um,
Hmm.
I've had the opportunity to travel and preach and teach on 4 different continents. I have seen the lame walk. I have seen the blind have sight restored. I've seen people laid hands on people with degenerative spinal diseases where they haven't been able to stand up straight for years and felt their spine just, they stand up straight. I felt muscles knit together under my hands and see random, that one, we just walked into a random fraternity house on the University of Georgia campus. Like we didn't belong there. We just walked in and started praying for people and got healed a guy with a torn quadricep muscle.
Oh.
And so I think some of that came from because I didn't have a background in the church. Like I just started reading the Bible to know who this God was that saved my life. I would read my Bible and then I would look at the church and read the Bible and like, well, how come we're not doing this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, like there's a lot of stories, but for me, I think that the main thing is that we've lowered the level of our expectations to our lived experience, right? So we've made our lived experience the ceiling rather than the floor. Right. And so we negate the promises of God. We don't allow the word to inform our expectations. And so, we live kind of anemic lives where we don't really experience abundance. I mean, like we have all these Christian catchphrases like, too blessed to be stressed, too anointed to be disappointed, you know,
Yeah,
but like, I'm like, there's so much more,
I agree.
and I think that has been my pursuit for the last 15, 16, 17, 18 years now. Let me not be satisfied with less than the fullness of what you've accomplished. And my story is not pretty, right? And I'll share this aspect of my story because I can share that side of things and they'll be like, oh, this is a really neat trajectory, like, this great conversion story. And then like he experiences all this miraculous stuff and then everything's great. No, I mean, so like I got married in 2013, was super excited. And then, we struggled with fertility issues, and then one night in the middle of the night, like God shared a dream with me and he said, like, you're gonna have a son. This is what his name is going to be. His name is Elijah Michael, which means my God is Yahweh, who is like our God. And he shared what his calling was. So my wife, I said, look, this is what God said in a dream. And so we prayed for 2.5 years every single day for him by name. And, like we wrestled with the question of should we do IVF? And I said, no. I said, like, if God has said that this is going to be, then it will be like our responsibility is to pray and to shepherd what he's spoken until it comes. And again, and then Elijah came. I mean, but then this is where like the intersection between faith and real life happens. Is like I hadn't dealt with my childhood trauma.
Hmm.
Like I hadn't dealt with the fact that I had an absentee father. And so all of a sudden when I found like even though God had promised a son, like as soon as I found out that I was gonna have a son, I completely fell apart. Right. I didn't know how to be a dad to a son.
Hmm.
Right. Like I was terrified that I was going to reproduce the same things that I had experienced with my own father. Like obviously I did the really holy thing and like I just devoted myself to fasting and prayer. Like it just so happened that my form of fasting and prayer like came in a bottle, you know, filled with bourbon.
That's
You know, I mean, like I got drunk in the Holy Ghost, minus the Holy Ghost, right? And so like I reverted to what I used to know for comfort rather than leaning into God because I was afraid, and it wasn't pretty. And in part, like I contributed to my marriage falling apart. Me, in the course of 2 weeks, I lost my wife, my son. I lost my position in ministry. I lost my church community. I lost my friends. Then I lost my home, and those were incredibly dark days. Right. And I think that because all of those things for me were connected to promises that God had spoken over my life, I retreated from God too. Like I didn't have a vision, a we vision, a me vision anymore. Like, so the fact that I had lost all these things that were identity forming for me, I didn't know what to do. Um, and so like the addict came back to the front and like just drank. And like, if I'm honest, like I didn't intend to survive. I convinced myself, you know, it, in all those years where I had been working in ministry, it had been close to 15 years by that point. Like I know for a fact that I was able to help thousands and thousands of people. And I'm like, I've done enough. And now I can check out. You know, it, and so like except like the seed that God plants in us doesn't go away. Like we can tuck it away in a corner, but like who we are is fundamentally changed. And so um I let a guy move in my house who had also been divorced, lost his kids, and I was like, let's share space and I'll try to help you get back on your feet. Unfortunately, like we were negative influences on one another. and found out that he was stealing money that was set aside for my son. And in a glorious moment of bourbon fueled clarity, like I basically threatened to end his life if she didn't leave. And this was like right as COVID was kicking off. So next thing I know, I'm facing criminal charges. So I already lost all those things, and now I was losing my freedom. And I can still remember the night I was sitting in the detention center, kind of having a pity party on the floor, lamenting the fact like I basically my whole life had burned to ashes. You know, God has a sense of humor, man. He's like, no, you're right. Like it is. Your life isn't actually. You lost everything you care about. But I'm still here. Am I enough?
Mm,
You know, and it's like I think all of us have those fears, right? Whatever's most precious to us, like if I lose it, it will destroy me. And all of my deepest fears were realized. I did lose everything that mattered to me, except God was still there. And so I was laying in a puddle of tears on the floor of the detention center. And I said, like, you are enough. And he began restoring my life. You know, and uh, I only ended up serving a little over 2 years of a 4-year sentence. You know, and like people are like, oh, it must have been horrible. And I'm like, prison was 2 of the best years of my life because the reality is like inside those walls, what's needed is power, right? And although those walls and the chains can constrain my freedom, they do not constrain God. And so I
mm,
saw God move in incredibly powerful ways, um, you know, saw people healed, saw prayers for restoration of children answered, saw gang fights broken up and rival gang members who were going to kill each other confess their sins to each other and ask for forgiveness while they were butt naked, still dripping from the shower. It reignited in me, I think, a trust that I had lost. Like so often in the world, we have a multitude of choices that we make before we turn to God. And I think sometimes God orchestrates circumstances so that we don't have any choice.
yeah, I agree.
And it's precisely in those moments when he really reveals that he is enough. I mean, and then I've been out for 4 years this year, and you know, it's been a crazy story since I've got out too. I for 6 or 7 months I was struggling to find work because of my record. I had to file bankruptcy because everything had defaulted while I was in prison. And I finally got a job paying $12 an hour baking French macaron cookies, which I don't know jack about baking cookies.
Hold on, Dave, before you go on, because that what is for the ladies and gentlemen at home, this is gonna be remarkable, and that's being mild to say it. But I wanna say that the time that Dave was in prison was actually really hard for it was just a really challenging season for really everybody, for his family, even for myself, because it led to this real deep questioning of how like, I just didn't know how to handle it. That's what it came down to, was just like, I have this friend who is hurting, but now he's in prison, but I don't really understand the circumstances. And even for me, like, to be completely transparent, and David and I have talked about this too, and we've had to reconcile, but it was just tough. It was really dark, and Dave just kind of gleaned because the podcast is only so long, guys. But it was just really, really tough. So there's not. I don't want you guys to just listen to it and just think like things were happening, and one thing right after the other, and then Dave gets out of prison. Like, there was in that. I would even almost say 3 years. I mean, 2 years, yeah, you were in prison, but like even the year afterward, when once you were out, like it was still kind of like we have to get the waters to kind of settle, get the dust to settle down, and get things to kind of calm down a bit. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we get into the how you get this position making macaroons, and then
Yeah,
wild things happen after that
right. I think that this is the challenge when you're trying to cover um, 17 years
in
where
an hour.
yeah, I mean where there's mountaintops and valleys, and it doesn't really do justice to the human side of the experience or even the miraculous side. And so I think that probably this is a primer. And then if there are questions where you want to go back, that's probably good.
You know, just before you go on into the next part, Dave, something I've never asked you before. I've started catching on while you were, especially right as you were getting admitted into prison. But what emotionally did you or were you ever mad and angry at God?
Probably. And I'll share this transparently because I don't think that it came out. This came out in a conversation I had with Mindy recently, where she was giving me a hard time because of how I baby our four dogs. Like she says that like I take and she's right, I do. But like it was one of those moments where like that like younger part of you I was just sitting there kind of wringing my hands and apologizing. And what they're saying is like my whole life I had dreamed of being a deeply invested father, to be present in my son's life in a way that my dad hadn't been present in mine. And that was stripped away from me. And I can never get that back. Like that was my dream. And God allowed that to happen. He didn't make it happen, but he allowed it to happen. And like not even God can change that. Right. It's like you can't say that God said God is not going to rewind time for the entire human race so that I can have the experience of raising my son. Like that is something that is lost to me forever. And I think that a lot of times when people say stuff like that, we're really quick to, oh yeah, but when he's older, like we get uncomfortable, and so we try to rush people past the grief of that. But it's a very real thing. And I think she said like, well, like, do you need to ask God forgiveness for being? I said, fuck God. You know, that's what I have to say. Fuck God. And here's the thing, like, he's a big boy. Like, he doesn't need protection from me. He knows how precious the idea of raising my son was, and he allowed me to lose it. And she asked me a question, which I thought was, she's like, the first commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength, like with all of your heart. And she's like, well, like, how do you feel? Part of your heart is shut off to God. Like, do you feel like you can love him in that way? And I said, so the reality is like, I have never tried to evaluate loving God with my whole heart. Like, I love him with all of me that I have the capacity to love him with. And the parts of me that are hardened toward him, that's his responsibility to work out. We have, but I think sometimes like we do have that hardness of heart towards God. We do have genuine pain and anger. And we're too holy to actually express it. Right. And because of that, like, so like, I don't know if I was supposed to cuss on your podcast, but um, that was genuinely where I was at. I mean, there in my mind, there's a reason why 2/3 of the songs are laments, right? Like there is this raw authenticity in the hearts of the psalmists. It's like, how long, oh God, will you allow us to endure this? Like you promised this, and this is my lived experience. And like this is the contemporary like Gen Z like WTF, like, and yet I will praise you. Like like side by side in the same psalms, you have the shaking of a fist at God because of their lived experience. Like I do not feel like you being faithful to what you've promised, and yet I will praise you. And yet, like I trust in your love. And it's like that is very much where I was. And some of that antipathy between me and God was, when I was going through my divorce, like 1 Corinthians 5 was really on my mind. Like it is better to be wrong than to take another believer to court. And there was a lot that was being communicated about me by my ex-wife that wasn't true. And I could have fought against it and made her my enemy in court. But for the sake of my son, I felt like that was not the right thing to do. And I'm grateful, like now, part of the miracle is now, like, she and I have a very strong co parenting relationship that God has brought a lot of healing into over time. And our son knows that we both love him deeply, but it took a lot of time for that to become a reality.
Mm.
I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It's just it was processing. I mean, it was just like what you said in the Psalms, like you had to go through that rough dark night of the soul. And yeah, but I mean, it's, believe both you and I would probably agree that God is big enough to take the weight of our emotions,
Well,
regardless
think that
how.
I think that if we try to protect God from the reality of how we're feeling, it's not like he doesn't know.
Correct. Right. And one of the things that I've been learning is that, God doesn't necessarily operate, how do I phrase this? Is more that God is a God of truth, and he's not going to allow us to just kind of hide our feelings and our emotions just because, like exactly what you said, he already knows. And so there's no point in operating in false when he's a God of truth. They're just diametrically opposed.
Well, and here's the thing, like, and I'll make a an overarching claim, generalization, which is always a great idea. I would say that like I did college ministry for 10 years. And one of the questions that, because like a lot of them are like, oh, I don't feel comfortable sharing my faith, you know. And I said, okay, so like, let me ask you this question. Would you want for someone else to have your experience of God? And for a lot of people, the answer is no, because they believe in God, they go to church, they'll read their Bible, like they do devotions, but their experience of God is kind of murky, right? So they're like, I'm not sure if I could. And I think that there's a reason for that. So, like, imagine a GPS, right? Like, you get in a car, here's the destination that you're going to, but you put in a starting point that is different than where you actually are. Phenomenal directions doesn't do you a damn bit of good. And for me, like, that's what approaching God, we present to God who we think we should be, not who we are. We come to him using not the language that reflects who we are, but like we think that this is the language that has to be used in order to pray. And so, God, in my mind, God's like, when are you going to bring me who you actually are? Because the one that I promised abundance to is the one that you're hiding from me. And what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to build up and bless the facade. And so, like, ironically, we strive so hard and put so much energy into presenting this facade for the world of, like, I'm a good Christian, right? But it's only skin deep, right? And so, like, people, and this is why, like, so many Christians too, people will love that facade, but that love doesn't penetrate. So you have a bunch of people called Christian who feel unloved, who feel unworthy, who have low self-esteem, imposter syndrome, where, oh, if they really knew who I am, they would reject me or abandon me. And like, that's antithetical to the gospel, right? Like, I love First Corinthians. Paul's like, don't forget who you were when you were called. Like, he chooses the shameful things of the world to confound a lot of us need to get in touch with our grief and our anger and our frustration, um, and bring it to God.
Yeah,
Right. And
I agree.
ironically, in bringing the darkness that's present within us into his light, it gets transformed. And that's a true miracle.
That, so much of that applies not just for those of you who listen regularly that are not believers or don't necessarily subscribe to any faith. I think you can probably apply a lot of what Dave just mentioned to exactly whatever societal group that you're part of, right? So even obviously with work, majority of that you do, because I've had friends who said that, like, oh, I have to show up to these happy hours in order to present a good front for my bosses and the supervisors so I can get pitched new jobs or whatever. And so it's this idea of being able to present this, in this case, in this example, it would be presenting your business self to, in order to get some kind, it becomes altruistic, right? To be able to get something out of it. And so it's almost like the same thing within the Christian world of, I'm going to put on this like Christian facade, and then I'm going to present in front of this group of people so that I get, approval or I get money to go on this mission trip or whatever. But yeah, I think that is something that travels
Well, and
definitely for sure
I'll give you
across the
an
board.
example. So, like, the part of the work we do right now, we do a lot of marriage and relationship counseling. And I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with God that kind of embodies that principle. So we were working with a couple yesterday, and they were doing deep work. And basically there was this one night that we were addressing, and like she had this need and he had this need, and neither one of their needs had gotten met, right? And they were just fighting over it like every which way, like bombs are being lobbed, and so like I was like, okay, I'm gonna put you guys in silos for a second. And so I said, okay, so this is the need that you had, like, to the woman. It's like, you had the need to feel like you were the only person who had his attention and focus, that he'd be willing to exclude everyone else. Like, you wanted to feel special. That is a valid need and desire. And like for the guy, it's like you don't get to go out socially often. It's like you had this need to connect with other people, um, and have a little bit of time to make those connections because work normally keeps you away from that. That also is a valid need. And I said, so like what typically happens is we try to leverage our needs so that it has greater priority, right? I said, so like, can you acknowledge that your partner had this need and that you didn't meet it and simply say, I'm sorry? And so they did that, right? And the guy was like, I've apologized before. And, so like the girl did her apology, but then she said, and then started going on. I was like, no, rewind the tape. Right. So you don't need to qualify, like, because we're afraid, like, if I don't qualify, then it's going to be used as ammunition. So she gave her apology. And then this guy, like, on his own initiative, he said, I'm sorry. I knew that you had that need and I chose not to meet it so that I could meet my own. And it's just like, boom. And Mindy and I were like, ooh, okay. And then we turned to the girl, we said, because she had said, like, he had apologized before, but she never felt it. And I said, tell me what, she's like, I feel that. Right. And I said, so that's the difference in saying, I'm sorry that I didn't meet your need. Right. Because that is an easy apology. I'm sorry that I knew that you had it and chose not to meet it because for me, my need was more important. That is the harder confession to make. Right. But like that is the difference between freedom and not freedom. Right. And that's not even a religious thing. That's in a relationship. Like so often, like we hurt our partners. Like it happens in every relationship. They'll say something, hurt them, and we'll be like, I didn't know. Well, I wonder how many times when we say, well, I didn't know, we actually did know, but we didn't care.
Ooh,
Right.
good
And
call.
that is the honest piece. And like a lot of times they're like, we don't know why we keep having the same cycle. I'm like, well, a lot of it is because you haven't really been your real self. Like, 'cause here's the thing, like, we don't want to be we don't want for our partner to think that we're an asshole. But the reality is that sometimes you are a
You
selfish
are.
asshole in your relationship. Like, and the reality is that your partner knows it, right? Like, even if they don't know it, like, in a way where they can verbally process it out loud. So part of the work that we do, like, works in like interpersonal neurobiology. And so like in a relationship, you are connected neurologically, right? So like you may be saying this, but your partner is picking up on the stuff that's under the surface that you're hiding, and so like the stuff that I was saying earlier about God, like it's applicable to every relationship. I mean, and so like for me, and this is maybe a rabbit trail, but like, and I think that there's a reason for that, right? Like in the beginning of the book of Genesis, what you see is rightly ordered relationships between God and humanity, like between man and woman, between man and himself, and between man and creation. And so, like, the distortion that happened distorted all of those relationships with a selfish bent. So, like, you know, we dishonor each other, we dishonor ourselves, we dishonor creation. Like, and I think part of the journey of healing is having the right order brought back to things. It can't happen if ruthless honesty isn't present.
One of the things that I've been learning a lot from Jamie Winship is the idea of confession is that within church is that we've come to believe within the church world, and I'll secularize this in a second, but it's the idea of I love the example that he uses is that if you bring a criminal to court, the criminal and you ask him to give a confession, the criminal isn't saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. But nothing happens until there's actual truth telling into which you're actually admitting to the fault of what you've done and what you've believed, right? And so from a secular standpoint of how he would translate it as truth telling, right? That would be the cross example of confession. So you do truth telling of, and like what that husband that you just
Right.
used as an example, that's exactly what he did. He's like, yeah, sorry, but this is what I did because of my own selfish motives and selfish needs. Dave, go ahead, finish that out, and I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah, I mean, and so, like, I think that a lot of times with truth telling, healing truth telling has to be separated from image management.
Yeah, 100%.
In every relationship, a lot of times when we're confessing or truth telling, part of the reason it doesn't land for the person that we're sharing with, even if we're acknowledging that we did wrong, is because we try to offer context, we try to explain why it's not that bad, and we minimize their experience.
Right.
And we're trying to maintain the positive image of us that we hope that they have, rather than trusting them to sort that out if we're just honest. Okay. You said you had a question.
Yeah, but I think that's so true. The just coming to the end of the show, everything that you've shared with us today, and I'm not exactly sure how to frame this one question to be able to encapsulate everything that we just went through, and we are gonna have to do a minimum of part 2 of just you, and then or maybe we'll do part 2, we'll bring Mindy in, and then we can have a part 3 with you because we gotta pick up on this other side with, after with the macaroons and
Yeah,
what
that's fine.
happens after that, because the story still gets absolutely wild, and you still gotta share the story what you shared with me today about learning Spanish. Just I mean, there's just we have a lot to cover, ladies and gentlemen. But all that to say is this is what let me put it this way. This is the thought that's running through my mind is that there are millions of Christians who go to church every Sunday, who may have somewhat of either kind of like a similar background to you, like they're showing up to church and they may be addicted to something, fill in the blank you choose. There are those who have broken relationships, marriages are on a thread, and yet we still keep showing up, presenting, hoping to have some kind of acceptance or value or whatever. With in light of your story, and obviously with me knowing you and you and Mindy, and it just seems that there is I don't know if a reality check is the right word, but how would you essentially the way that you've challenged me when I've presented certain situations to you, how would you essentially do that for like imagining that you were speaking to every single church in the Western culture, Western hemisphere? How would you challenge them the way that you challenge me in light of everything that you have lived through thus far?
Wow.
Yeah, that's why it was so hard to be able to process.
Yeah, okay. So I think that if I could distill the issue, the undergirding issue that I see in the church down to um a singular sentence that from which a lot of these issues arise is a lot of people within the church are still striving to prove or earn their identity rather than living out of it.
Mm,
Okay. And so, and what I mean by that is that there's a fundamental insecurity. Like, I am a son. Like, and let me just take it out of the religious realm. Like, I am my father's son, Graham, and that is who I am. I don't need to go around being like, "Hi, I'm Graham's son. Hi, I'm Graham's son. Let me prove to you that I'm Graham's son." No, I mean that's just who I am, and the actions connected to that flow out of who I am. Right. But so often with the church, it's like I need to prove to the world that I am a Christian,
Yeah.
and like First John says it pretty simply, right? Like, whoever says I abide in him ought to walk just as he walked. And here's the thing, like, they would agree with that, but they don't actually consider it. Jesus didn't walk around being like, "Hey guys, I am the Son of God. Hey, I am the Son of God. By the way, I am the Son of God." Right? Like, he didn't do that. He did what the Son of God who had his eyes fixed on the Father did. He mourned with those who mourned. He healed the sick. He ate with those who were marginalized in the community. He helped bring clarity to the things that they didn't understand. Right. Like, and so like I think that we spend so much of our time trying to prove our identity that we really miss out on the freedom of just living from the reality is you are a son. Like, you are a daughter. Like, so much of your mental, emotional, and spiritual energy is going into maintaining the image that you think that you're supposed to have, that it's not being invested into living out of who you are.
Yeah, the phrase that comes to mind that I've been learning over and over again is that identity has to precede your activity, that it's because otherwise in the Western culture, we've done it the opposite way of, obviously with the first question we normally ask each other whenever we're a group of people is, "Oh, what do you do?" Not, "Who are you?"
Right.
Right? And so it becomes really, really difficult. Well, Dave, what I wanna do right now is, I'm just gonna go ahead and plan that we're gonna have definitely parts 2 and 3.
Okay. Yeah, I think
And,
I ran with boss, and she's okay with that.
okay, way cool. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're gonna be in for a real, real treat to have this power couple on. Dave, if people have questions and they wanna get a hold of you, if they just, whatever, where do you hang out the most? Like, how can people reach you or not reach you just in case you don't want that?
No, I mean, thanks for putting me on the spot, Steve. So my address is so you can reach me on Facebook. I don't know if you can share that, but if you go to www.b2bcounseling.com, my email address is on there. So is Mindy's. So like, if you have questions about your journey of faith, about identity, about marriage, about relationships, that's what we love doing. We like entering into the messy spaces with people, and helping them find abundance and in order in their lives. And you're right, like an hour, like we just skim the surface like skipping a rock, man. I haven't practiced my elevator speech like for my own life because I don't know how to do that. But yeah, I'm always open to talk to folks. Like, I find that whenever a conversation arises, like the principle I live by is like schedule always takes second place
Mhm,
behind people,
mhm.
because I believe that there's an intention in the people that cross our paths, and that those are fertile moments for transformative experiences, both for myself and the people that. So I'm like, whatever I've planned for my day, really, like, God has full permission to interrupt my schedule, unless it's something that I planned with Mindy, and then I don't have permission to change that without her permission.
Absolute. That's so correct. And that's a perfect, perfect place to end. Dave, thank you so much for joining us and looking forward to having part 2.
Man, my pleasure, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care.